The bet was simple. Dean Martin and Bob Hope would play 18 holes of golf. Winner takes $50,000. Loser writes a check. It was May 1968. Lakeside Country Club. Beautiful day. High stakes. But here's what nobody knew. Dean Martin had no intention of winning that game. Not because he couldn't. Dean was a scratch golfer. One of the best amateur players in Hollywood. He could absolutely beat Bob Hope. But Dean had a different plan. See, Dean knew something about Bob Hope that most people didn't know. Bob took golf very seriously. Bob's entire identity was wrapped up in being competitive, being the best, being the winner. If Dean won, Bob would be gracious about it, but inside it would eat at him. Bob would obsess over it, replay every shot in his mind, lose sleep over where he went wrong. And Dean didn't want that. Dean liked Bob, respected Bob, didn't want to bruise his ego over a stupid golf game. So Dean made a decision. I'll lose, but I'll make it look real. For 18 holes, Dean played just poorly enough to lose without it being obvious he was throwing the game. He missed putts by inches. He hit drives that landed in the rough, but not too far. He played like a guy having an off day, not like a guy intentionally losing. Bob never suspected. He just thought he was playing the best golf of his life. And when Bob won, when Dean handed him that $50,000 check, Bob was thrilled. But Dean was already thinking about what he was going to do next. And what he did next was genius. To understand why this golf game mattered so much to Bob Hope, you need to understand who Bob Hope was in 1968. He was 65 years old. He'd been famous for over 30 years, radio, movies, television, USO tours, where he'd performed for troops in World War II, Korea, and now Vietnam. Bob Hope was an American icon. But Bob was also deeply, intensely competitive about everything, about ratings, about jokes, about who got more laughs, and especially about golf. Golf was Bob's thing. He played constantly. He'd play with presidents, with celebrities, with business moguls. He'd organized charity golf tournaments. He'd built his entire social life around golf. And Bob was good. Really good. He had a low handicap. He'd won amateur tournaments. He took lessons constantly, always trying to improve. But there was one problem. Bob couldn't beat Dean Martin. Dean Martin was a natural athlete. He'd been a boxer in his youth. He moved with an effortless grace that translated to every sport. And in golf, Dean was a scratch golfer, meaning he could play par or better on most courses. Dean and Bob had been playing golf together since the late 1940s, sometimes with Bing Crosby, sometimes with Frank Sinatra, sometimes just the two of them. And Bob almost never won. It drove Bob crazy. Not openly. Bob would laugh it off, make jokes about it, but inside it bothered him. How could Dean Martin, who seemed to barely try, who often showed up half-drunk, who treated golf like a casual hobby, consistently beat Bob Hope, who practiced constantly and took it seriously? In early 1968, Bob decided to change the dynamic. He challenged Dean to a real game. High stakes, $50,000, winner take all. Dean had laughed when Bob proposed it. They were having drinks at the Friars Club. Bob brought it up casually. Dean, how about we make our next game interesting? Real money, say $50,000. Dean raised an eyebrow. Bob, that's a lot of money. You scared? Dean smiled. Of losing? No. Of winning? Maybe. Bob didn't understand what that meant, but he pressed. So, you'll do it? Dean considered for a moment, then nodded. Sure, Bob. Why not? $50,000. You pick the date. They settled on a Saturday in May. Lakeside Country Club in Los Angeles. Just the two of them. No gallery, no press, just two friends playing golf for very high stakes. The night before the game, Dean called his accountant. I'm going to need you to set up a $50,000 donation to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. The accountant was confused. A donation? Okay. When do you want it sent? Sunday, but I want it credited to Bob Hope, not to me. I'm sorry. What? Bob Hope. The donation should say it's from Bob Hope. Dean, I don't understand. You don't need to understand. Just make sure it's set up. The donation goes through Sunday afternoon in Bob Hope's name. The accountant agreed, still confused, but he'd learned over the years not to question Dean's unusual requests. Saturday morning arrived. Perfect weather, Clear skies, slight breeze, ideal golf conditions. Dean and Bob met at Lakeside at 8 a.m. They shook hands. Both were grinning, but you could see the competitive fire in Bob's eyes. This mattered to him. Really mattered. They teed off on the first hole. Bob hit a solid drive straight down the fairway. Dean hit an even better one about 20 yards past Bob's. Bob's smile faltered slightly. Here we go again, he thought. Dean's going to beat me. But then something strange happened. Dean's second shot, an easy 7-iron to the green, landed in the bunker, not far from the green, but not on it either. Bob's second shot landed on the green about 15 feet from the pin. Dean's bunker shot was decent. He got on the green, but he 3-putted. Bob 2-putted. Bob won the first hole. Dean smiled, shook Bob's hand. Nice playing, Bob. Bob was thrilled. Maybe today's my day, he thought. They moved to the second hole. Dean's drive was solid, but not spectacular. Bob's was great, straight and long. Bob won the second hole, too. By the fifth hole, Bob was up by 3 strokes. He couldn't believe it. He was beating Dean Martin, actually beating him. Dean, meanwhile, was carefully calibrating his performance. He couldn't play too badly or Bob would suspect, but he couldn't play too well or he'd win. So he played just below his actual ability, missing putts by inches, hitting drives that landed in the rough but not out of bounds, playing like a very good golfer having an off day. Bob never suspected. He was too focused on his own game, too thrilled that he was finally beating Dean. By the turn, after 9 holes, Bob was up by 4 strokes. He was practically glowing. They took a break, had sandwiches. Bob was animated, talking about his shots, analyzing Dean's mistakes. Dean listened, smiled, sipped his drink. You're playing great today, Bob, Dean said. Thanks. I don't know what it is. Everything's just clicking. Dean knew what it was, but he didn't say anything. The back 9 continued the same way. Bob played well. Not his absolute best, but solid. Dean played just badly enough to stay behind. By the 16th hole, Bob was up by 6 strokes. On the 18th hole, the final hole, Bob had already won. Even if Dean played perfectly and Bob played terribly, the math didn't work. Bob had won the game. Bob's final putt dropped. He pumped his fist. Actually pumped his fist. This was the biggest golf victory of his life. Dean walked over, hand extended. Great game, Bob. You played fantastic. Bob was beaming. Thanks, Dean. I don't know what happened. I finally beat you. Dean pulled out his checkbook right there on the green. He wrote out a check, $50,000. Signed it with a flourish, handed it to Bob. You earned it, pal. Bob took the check, staring at it. $50,000 from Dean Martin. Proof that he'd finally beaten his friend. They shook hands. Bob was already planning how he'd frame a copy of this check, put it in his office, show it to everyone. Dean smiled. Enjoy it, Bob. You deserved this win. Bob drove home feeling like $1 million. Actually, like $50,000. He showed the check to his wife, Dolores. Look, I beat Dean. I actually beat him. Dolores smiled. That's wonderful, honey. I'm proud of you. Bob spent the rest of the evening replaying the game in his mind. Every shot, every putt, savoring the victory. Meanwhile, Dean went home and called his accountant. Did you set up that St. Jude donation? Yes, Dean. It's ready to go. I just need your confirmation. Do it. Transfer the $50,000 tomorrow afternoon. Make sure it's credited to Bob Hope. Will do. Dean hung up and poured himself a drink. He smiled to himself. Bob got his win. St. Jude gets $50,000. And I get to watch Bob's face when he figures out what I did. Sunday morning, Bob Hope walked into his bank. He was still riding high from yesterday's victory. He wanted to deposit that check, get it officially recorded, maybe even request a fancy deposit slip he could frame. He walked up to the teller. Good morning. I'd like to deposit this check. He handed over Dean's $50,000 check. The teller looked at it, looked at Bob, looked back at the check. She typed something into her computer. Her expression changed. Mr. Hope, this check has already been cashed. Bob's smile disappeared. What? That's impossible. Dean gave it to me yesterday. The teller looked at her screen again. It was cashed yesterday at 3:47 p.m. The funds were transferred to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, Memphis, Tennessee. Bob stared at her. St. Jude? But this is my check. Dean made it out to me. The teller nodded. Yes, but the donation was made in your name, Mr. Hope. According to our records, you donated $50,000 to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital yesterday afternoon. Bob felt multiple emotions crash into him simultaneously. Confusion. How did Dean do this? Anger. That sneaky bastard. Admiration. That brilliant sneaky bastard. Bob thanked the teller and walked out of the bank in a daze. He got to his car, sat in the driver's seat, and then he started laughing. Dean had played him completely, perfectly. Dean had let Bob win, had given Bob the ego boost of beating him, had let Bob walk around for 24 hours thinking he'd finally beaten Dean Martin at golf. And then Dean had taken that $50,000, money Bob had won, and donated it to charity in Bob's name. So now Bob got credit for a massive donation he didn't even make. St. Jude got $50,000 they desperately needed. And Dean got what? The satisfaction of being the smartest guy in the room. Bob drove straight to Dean's house. Didn't call ahead. Just showed up. Dean's housekeeper answered the door. Mr. Hope, what a nice surprise. Is Dean home? He's by the pool. Go on back. Bob walked through the house to the backyard. Dean was lounging by the pool, drink in hand, reading the newspaper. Dean looked up, saw Bob and smiled. That trademark Dean Martin smile. Bob, what a pleasant surprise. Want a drink? Bob walked over, sat down. He stared at Dean for a long moment. You sneaky bastard. Dean's smile widened. I have no idea what you're talking about. The check, the $50,000 check. You donated it to St. Jude in my name. Dean shrugged. Did I? I don't remember that. Dean. Bob, if someone donated $50,000 to St. Jude in your name, you should probably thank them. That's a wonderful gesture. Bob couldn't help it. He started laughing. You let me win. You threw the game. Can you prove that? Your drive on the 7th hole landed 10 yards short of where you usually hit it. Your putt on the 14th. You've made that putt 100 times. You missed it by an inch. Dean sipped his drink. Sounds like I had an off day. Sounds like you're full of it. Dean laughed. Maybe. They sat there for a moment. Then Bob said quietly, Why'd you do it? Dean looked at Bob. The joking tone disappeared. Because you're my friend, Bob, and that win mattered to you. More than $50,000 matters to me. So, you got your win. You get credit for a big donation. St. Jude gets money for sick kids. Everybody wins. Bob felt his eyes getting wet. You could have just beaten me, taken the money, used it however you wanted, and I would have been gracious about it. But inside, it would have eaten at you. I've seen how you are after you lose. You replay every shot. You can't let it go. Bob nodded. It was true. I didn't want that, Dean continued. I wanted you to have a good day, a great day, and I wanted that money to do some good, so that's what happened. Bob wiped his eyes. You're impossible. You know that? I've been told. And you're not getting that money back. St. Jude has it now. It's in my name. I'm taking credit for it. Dean smiled. Good. You should. They sat by the pool for another hour, drinking, talking, laughing. Two friends who understood each other completely. The story of Dean and Bob's golf game became legend in Hollywood. But most people didn't know the full story. They knew Bob had beaten Dean and won $50,000. They knew Dean had donated the money to St. Jude in Bob's name. But they didn't know that Dean had lost on purpose, that he'd spent 18 holes carefully playing just badly enough to lose without making it obvious. Bob Hope told the story often in his later years. Dean Martin is the only man I know who'd let me beat him at golf, let me think I'd won fair and square, and then donate my winnings to charity in my name. That's not just generosity. That's psychology. That's understanding your friend well enough to give them exactly what they need and making them better for it. In 1995, when Dean Martin died, Bob Hope spoke at his memorial service. He told the golf story. By the end, Bob was crying. Dean let me win. And in doing so, he taught me something about winning that I'd never understood before. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't beating your opponent. It's making your opponent feel like they've beaten you. and then using that moment to do something good. Dean won that golf game. He just let me think I had. The lesson of Dean and Bob's golf game isn't about golf. It's about knowing your friends well enough to give them what they need. Even if what they need is to beat you. Dean Martin could have won that game easily. Could have taken the $50,000. Could have added another victory to his record. But Dean understood something deeper. Bob needed that win more than Dean needed the money. And sick kids at St. Jude needed the money more than either of them. So Dean let Bob win. Let Bob have his moment. And then quietly, brilliantly made sure the money went where it would do the most good. That's not weakness. That's not letting someone else win out of pity. That's intelligence. Emotional intelligence. Understanding people, understanding what matters. Bob Hope got his victory. St. Jude got $50,000. And Dean Martin got the satisfaction of being the smartest, kindest guy in Hollywood.